Hey, it's Dr. Darren Schmidt. So this video is about lactic acidosis, and the biggest complaint I've had from people and myself is that the old information is all I had related to this mechanism of chronic disease. And I'm going to go over some new information that I found. Now this video is shareable with people with any kind of chronic condition, chronic health problem, and this explains in more detail with new information, like modern information, the mechanism of what may be causing their disease. So share this on Facebook groups that have something to do with chronic disease. So now my information that I've talked about in all my previous videos on lactic acidosis is from 1960 and earlier. Now, this past weekend, I was at a conference and I was inspired by everything I heard on stage. It was actually Low Carb Denver. It was fantastic. And I was going through some research on my favorite subject, the mechanism of chronic disease. And this is an article right here, and I'll say this so you don't have to try to read it. I know the font's probably really small. It says the role of lactic acid in the vasodilator action of adrenaline in the human limb. Now, lactic acidosis is the expansion of it's dirty blood and hypoxic blood, low oxygen blood, causing the arteries to dilate, which then stagnates the blood flow, which causes the cells to starve and die. Cell death equals tissue death equals organ death equals symptoms equals chronic disease equals body death. That's the mechanism. And the information that I have always been reading and talking to you about is from 1960 and earlier. And I found this study from 1961, and maybe this is the one study that kind of ended all of it, all the future research. It says right here that they took sodium lactate and they injected it into a human arm and they measured, did the arteries dilate or not? And the answer is no. So then I'm thinking, well, maybe lactic acid doesn't dilate arteries. Maybe the whole thing is false. But the truth is, sodium lactate is different than lactic acid. And it's a different substance. So this is 1961, and there hasn't been any really good research since then. So maybe this is the one article that stopped it all. But regardless, I kept doing some research, and I came upon this this phrase, disturbance of circulation in pathology. And so I started clicking on these types of links, and I have, it's a veterinary medicine that continues the information regarding the mechanism of chronic disease. It's the vets. It's not the medical doctors. So the vets learn this, and here is a series of units, 4 units at the General Veterinary Pathology website for the University of Georgia. So here we have number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm going to talk about number 1. I'm going to go over just one page out of 49 pages. I'm going to go over one page. But the second unit is cellular injury. How do the cells actually get injured? So let's go over this first, the first one. Disturbances of circulation, and it's broken down into 2 things. And I'm gonna grab one slide here. The 2 things in the disturbances of circulation are hyperemia, which means lots of blood. Hyperemia means blood. And then congestion, which also means lots of blood. But the hyperemia is a fast flow, and the congestion is a slow flow of blood. So each can be defined as an increase in blood volume in a particular tissue. So with hyperemia, you have dilation of the arteries and an increase in blood flow in an organ or a tissue. But with congestion, you have passive hyperemia due to engorgement of veins and venules by blood. So it's the passive hyperemia that is what causes which is part of the mechanism of chronic disease. So this is what I've talked about, capillary engorgement with hypoxic and toxic blood that causes the cells to starve and die. Here we're going to talk about hyperemia. And let's say you have trauma, like a physical trauma to your arm, or you get allergies. And now you have redness and you have swelling. So it says right here, bright red, swollen, pulse may be felt readily. You can maybe feel the pulse in your sinuses. And it says here causes. You have an increased demand for nutrients because of exercise, like work being done, or pathological in response to certain vasodilator chemicals and neurogenic stimuli, such as you have a shock or somebody almost hits you with their car. You're going to have hyperemia around your heart, for example, or your muscles, so you can run away from the car. Okay, so the effect is it hastens movement of metabolites, which are chemicals that make things happen, metabolites, into the area, and then the flushing of catabolites from the area. Catabolites are the things that have been broken down. You want to flush out the catabolites and bring in the metabolites. Okay, that's hyperemia. Let's talk about congestion. So it's an excess of blood contained within blood vessels, any part of the body, due to a passive process. Here, instead of red, the appearance is dark blue or a red tinge, and it's also swollen. It's cooler instead of being warmer. And then it says after death, the color becomes even more dark blue. And if you cut the surface, you get blood oozing out freely. So here they're talking about death. And if chronic, the tissues may have a brown color. Okay. And then microscopic, the capillaries and veins are engorged with blood. Here's the effects. Leads to hypoxia and accumulation of catabolites in the tissues. That's the unwanted stuff. You got to clear that out, and it's not getting cleared out. That leads to edema. See, if you have somebody with a heart attack, their ankles are swollen. That's edema. It interferes with normal function of involved tissue. That's an important statement. So if you have interference of normal function of any tissue, what happens? You get symptoms. So different organs will give you different symptoms. And with this one little line, they're telling you that all the symptoms come from interference of normal function of the involved tissue. You may see necrosis if the condition is severe enough. That's diabetes, when somebody has to have their foot cut off or their leg cut off, or they're going blind. So, and then you see necrosis of the heart when one little piece of it dies and you have a partial heart attack, and the doctors say, oh, you're lucky, only this part is necrotic. It's the same thing. Thrombosis occurs, which is blood clotting readily in the veins where blood is moving sluggishly, and that blood clot can turn into an embolism, which is like it dislodges and then it gets stuck where an artery bifurcates. You have an artery that turns into two arteries. You can get a thrombosis turning into an embolism. The embolism blocks blood flow. Okay, so there's that. That's a modern definition of lactic acidosis, but they don't call it lactic acidosis. They call it congestion, or maybe even hyperemia, but it's more like it's congestion. Okay, let's go to this. This is from Richard Claybund. He's a PhD, cardiovascular physiology concepts. I'm going to read this to you. And he's talking about the metabolic theory of blood flow regulation. So blood flow is closely coupled to tissue metabolic activity in most organs of the body. For example, an increase in tissue metabolism, as occurs during muscle contraction like working out, or during changes in neuronal activity in the brain, such as almost getting hit by a car, leads to an increase in blood flow called active hyperemia. There is considerable evidence that actively metabolizing cells surrounding arterioles release vasoactive substances that cause vasodilation. So you have cells that are actively metabolizing, they're digesting food, and then they release their waste products. Like they don't have a toilet, so they just put it out beyond their cell wall, and their cell poop goes into the space beyond their cell wall, and it ends up into the circulatory system. And what happens when there's poop? Well, the arteries will dilate, and they're trying to get that out. That's a catabolite. Okay, so they release vasoactive substances that cause vasodilation. This is termed the metabolic theory of blood flow regulation. Increases or decreases in metabolism lead to increases or decreases in the release of these vasodilator substances. So you eat more, you poop more. You eat less, you poop less. That's how, well, I'm just translating it into regular English. These metabolic mechanisms ensure that the tissue is adequately supplied by oxygen coming in, and that products of metabolism such as waste leave. And they give examples: carbon dioxide, H+, which is hydrogen ion, which is acid, and then lactate. Those are the three examples in this paragraph. So carbon dioxide, you breathe it out, and then lactic acid, you got to get that out too. And those are removed. Okay, several different mechanisms that may be involved in the metabolic regulation of blood flow are summarized below. And I pulled out this hypoxia, and they actually have only two mechanisms, but the first one's hypoxia. It says decreased tissue perfusion of oxygen resulting from reduced oxygen supply or increased oxygen demand. So you can get this from exercising, or you can get this from being sick and not even exercising. This causes vasodilation. Hypoxia-induced vasodilation may be direct, such as inadequate oxygen to sustain smooth muscle contraction, or from exercise, or indirect via the production of vasodilator metabolites because you're sick and your body's toxic and you have chemicals or heavy metals or parasites or infection, or you're eating sugar, junk food, red dye, Cheerios with additives, whatever, all that stuff. Note, however, that hypoxia induces vasoconstriction in the pulmonary circulation. So I said that last sentence. You can have vasodilation in different parts of the body, let's say in your legs, but your lungs can be vasoconstricted to try to get more oxygen and clear up the hypoxia in the legs. So you can have different responses of different arteries throughout your body, depending on what's needed. Okay, and then the other mechanism in metabolic regulation is the tissue metabolites and ions. So things that will cause vasodilation, and I highlighted 3 of them: carbon dioxide, hydrogen ion, that's the acid, and then lactic acid. And I'll put the link below if you want to read more about that. So this is from the U.S. National Library of Medicine, Medline Plus, the lactic acid test. Lactic acid is mainly produced in muscle cells and red blood cells. It forms when the body breaks down carbohydrates. It's used for energy when oxygen levels are low. Times when your body's oxygen level might drop include during intense exercise, and number 2, when you have an infection or disease. A test can be done to measure the amount of lactic acid in the blood. And it's just a simple blood test. And I used to do this in my office, but I took the machine and I threw it away because of the whole black mold situation that I moved out of that office. And I just purchased another one as a screening. It's a screening test. Okay, let's talk about this right here. Okay, this is my lovely metabolic pathways poster. It's over 550 metabolic reactions that happen in the body. And I'm going to show you some very simple things, just some broad concepts right here. But right in the middle is where the magic happens. And here we have, in this pink right there, that's glycolysis, that's burning sugar. And then down here we have the production of energy. And then over to the left we have the metabolism of fats. So at the beginning of the production of energy we have pyruvate. Are you going to get that pyruvate from burning sugar or from fats? And here's the ketones right here in the blue. So you're doing all 3, hopefully. If you're doing a ketogenic low-carb diet, hopefully you're going to be doing this fat breakdown. But certainly there's times when you're burning sugar. Okay, but this part right here where I'm highlighting, look right there, that's death. Okay, this is life right here. The yellow mitochondrial energy production is life. Here's the guy running right there. That's life. Using fat as fuel is life. Using ketones as fuel is life. And using sugar is also life. And here's death right here. Acetate, ethanol, acetaldehyde, and lactate. How the chances of you leaning towards death are greater when you're burning sugar all the time, glycolysis. This is where the pyruvate, that's the money, that's when your body starts to make energy. The pyruvate goes into acetaldehyde, ethanol, acetate, and lactate. Okay, now, or the pyruvate goes into the mitochondria to make energy. So what are you going to do? What's your pyruvate doing? You want to get this pyruvate from, into the mitochondria. You don't want to have that pyruvate convert over to these waste products. This is key. And this is mitochondrial health. It's all about the mitochondria. That's where energy is made. When you have energy, your cells can clean themselves out. Your muscles can contract. Your cells can your tissues can make hormones. Everything starts and ends with the mitochondria. So you want excellent mitochondrial health right here. And so that's why ketosis is more important than glycolysis. Always burning sugar is a bad thing. Okay, so let's talk about these 4 waste products a little bit. I already talked about lactate, actually in the form of lactic acid. Lactate converts quickly to lactic acid. And that's when, and lactic acid doesn't last long in your body if you're fit. And you can have sore muscles for 10 minutes. I've been in ketosis in and out mostly now for 6 months. I go to the gym, I'm not sore. So my body gets those catabolites out, and there's no lactic acid buildup whatsoever in my muscles. All right, so ketogenic athletes will tell you this. But people that have chronic heart disease or women with fibromyalgia, they have constant lactic acid that never gets cleaned out. That's why ketosis is so important. All right, so stay away from this death zone right here. Now, ethanol, that's alcohol. So I found this really interesting article about alcoholism, and I highlighted some of the big points. Peripheral vasodilation and hypotension, which result from acute ingestion or administration of ethanol. I just highlighted that part. Ethanol causes vasodilation. Okay, now ethanol, in contrast to acting, so it can be a vasodilator early. Later, it can be a vasoconstrictor. That's an interesting part about this. Okay, now ethanol, in contrast to acting as a vasodilator in the splanchnic vasculature, that means in the abdomen. All right, not in the muscles, but in the stomach and stuff. Okay, so ethanol is often a potent and concentration-dependent constrictor of arterioles and venules in the skeletal muscle vasculature. So it can cause vasodilation here, causing cell death in your spleen, stomach, intestines, liver, lungs, and it can be a vasoconstrictor in the muscles and in the heart, causing stroke, causing heart attack. And so it says here, although ethanol's major metabolites, such as acetaldehyde and acetate, and that's right here, we got acetate right here, acetaldehyde right there. So acetaldehyde and acetate, they can produce vasodilator and vasoconstrictor effects on macro and microcirculatory blood vessels. Their specific vascular actions in a particular region of the microcirculation appear to be directly opposite to those induced by ethanol. So there's some give and take with the vasoconstriction and vasodilation of ethanol, acetaldehyde, and acetate. Okay, now this is an interesting concept, because when somebody has black mold, like I had black mold, and some of my patients, your blood pressure goes up and down. Now I've seen people who don't have black mold, but they have blood pressure that goes up and down. And they take blood pressure medications to try to drive it down, but it'll break through and their blood pressure goes up. So this is part of the thing about being poisoned by excess carbohydrates or accelerated glycolysis or black mold, which makes lactic acid, or, toxicity. You can have the same effects unpredictably. It's unpredictable. Okay, so anyways, getting back to this chart right here. So I just want to point out right here, so ethanol is a form of physiology where you're burning alcohol. So alcoholics have a different physiology compared to people burning lactic acid. So this is more like cancer and maybe some diabetes and heart disease. And then you have alcoholism here. Acetaldehyde is the hangover feeling. Stay away from this area. And the best way to stay away from it is to verge away from the upper right corner of this whole diagram. Get away from this and get more down into here. Go lower left corner, ketones, fat burning. That is the native state of the body. And I do recommend people cycle in and out of it. But I know a lot of people who don't. And I'm meeting more and more people. So at this Low Carb Denver seminar that I just attended, there are people just eating nothing but meat for 3-4 years. And they've lost 100 pounds or more. And they're physically doing so much better. And their fatigue is gone, etc. This is a slide that I stole from Ivor Cummins. He was a speaker this past weekend. His website is thefatemperor.com. And Ivor, I'm giving you full credit for this. And he's saying that hyperinsulinemia is part of the solution. If you want to target your health care, you got to get the insulin down. That's ketosis. You want to get rid of those high blood glucose spikes, and you want to drive down inflammation. Ketosis will do that. Make sure your blood pressure is under control. Ketosis can do that. Getting rid of black mold can do that. Eat clean food, not dirty food. Don't eat refined foods, and that'll help get rid of oxidative stress. Make sure you get all your minerals and vitamins. You can have too much iron. That's something to be aware of, or too little iron. You want to get rid of any toxins like heavy metals, any infections, straighten out any autoimmune situations, and don't smoke, etc., etc. This is my plan too, and he put it in this sort of format. I put it in this kind of format, and I put it in other formats too, but it's a holistic viewpoint. Ivor is an engineer. He's not a medical doctor, but he's super brilliant, and he's totally on track with what I've been saying too for the last 3 years. So please share this with other people who are searching for help with their healthcare. And this would be good for fibromyalgia support groups on Facebook, or others, heart disease, diabetes, keto people, keto groups on Facebook. And this is my viewpoint on ketosis. So some people say ketosis is great because it lowers inflammation. Other people say it's great because it lowers insulin. That's all true. And my point is, ketosis gets you away from the death zone of the metabolic pathways poster. And you want that buffer. You don't want to be always burning sugar and glycolysis. You want to get into the fat burning ketosis, and it gives you that bigger buffer of longevity, not just health right now for today, but longevity, health, so that you're not sick at the age of 60 and then dead at the age of 80. That's 20 years of misery. You want to be healthy when you're 80, and then it takes 6 days to die, or 6 months, or 1 night. So you want that 20-year buffer on your side, not on the Grim Reaper side. So if you like this information, please give me a thumbs up. And also subscribe if you're new. Hit that bell for notifications.